Let's be real, our entire modern world runs on oil. It's the lifeblood of our civilization. But for decades, this one huge question has been hanging over our heads. What happens when we hit the peak? You know, the point where we can't pump it out any faster and we start the long slide down the other side. Is it a gentle slope or a straight up cliff? To figure that out, we've got to look at this from every possible angle. So to really get a feel for what's at stake, let's just do a quick thought experiment. It's a little dramatic, but stick with me. What if you woke up tomorrow morning and every single drop of oil on the planet had just vanished? Poof, gone. What actually stops working? The short answer is pretty much everything. Global transport, it just grinds to a halt. I mean, no planes in the sky, no container ships on the ocean, no trucks on the highways. Our entire food system completely collapses. Tractors can't run, fishing boats are stuck in port, and the natural gas we need for fertilizer is gone. The flow of goods to stores, it just stops. Millions would lose their heating overnight. Even our hospitals would be in deep, deep trouble, losing access to everything from plastic syringes to essential medicines. Our civilization is literally built on a foundation of oil. Now, that shocking scenario we just talked about, it isn't just some sci-fi plot. It's really just an extreme version of a future that some scientists have been warning us about for over 70 years. And it's all based on the simple science of what happens when you have a resource that's going to run out. This whole conversation really revolves around one core concept, Hubbert's peak theory. See, back in 1956, this geologist, M. King Hubbert, he came up with a really simple but totally profound idea. He said that for any finite resource, doesn't matter if it's a single oil well or the whole planet's supply, production doesn't just run along and then fall off a cliff. Nope. Instead, it follows a bell-shaped curve. It starts slow, shoots up to a maximum production level, or the peak, and then it begins a decline that you just can't reverse. So how does this actually work? Well, it builds up in layers. You start with just one single oil well. Typically, it pumps out the most oil right when it's new, and then its output starts to drop off. Okay, now zoom out to a whole oil field. That's just a bunch of wells all together. The field's total production will rise as new wells are drilled. It'll hit a flat plateau for a while, and then, as all those individual wells start to fade, the whole field goes into decline. Now zoom out one last time. You add up all the oil fields in the entire world, and what do you get? One giant global bell curve. That's Hubbert's peak on a planetary scale. And what's just wild is that Hubbert saw this whole dilemma coming ages ago. This is one of his actual graphs from way back in 1949. He saw two possible futures for humanity after we hit the fossil fuel peak. Curve number one, that's the optimistic path. We transition to a sustainable, high-tech future running on renewables. But then there's curve number two, and it's a lot darker. It shows a collapse, a fall all the way back to the kind of subsistence farming our ancestors did. He basically said, look, we're going to have to make a choice. So this brings us right to the heart of the debate that's still raging today. What actually causes the peak to happen? And, of course, the million-dollar question, have we already gone over the top? You've basically got two main schools of thought here. First, there's peak supply. This is the classic Hubbert idea. We just hit a geological wall. We literally can't get the oil out of the ground fast enough to keep up with what the world wants. And that leads to shortages, price spikes, and all kinds of economic chaos. But then there's this other theory, peak demand. This is the idea that we as a civilization choose to walk away from oil. We innovate our way out of it. We switch to electric cars and renewables, and our demand for oil just drops off a cliff long before we ever physically run out of the stuff. Now, just when everybody thought they had the timeline figured out, the story got a whole lot more complicated. And the complication has a name, unconventional oil. Okay, so this is not the easy-to-get, gushing black gold of the old days. No, this is the tough stuff. It's oil that's locked up tight in shale rock or mixed in with sand or is as thick as molasses. It's super expensive, it takes a ton of energy, and it's really hard to extract. But when it showed up on the scene, it completely rewrote all the predictions. If you want to see just how big of a deal this was, all you have to do is look at the United States. Back in 1956, Hubbert made this incredibly bold prediction that U.S. oil production would peak around 1970. And you know what? He was dead on. It peaked and started a long, slow decline. For decades, it looked like a perfect textbook Hubbert's curve. But then, around 2009, the shale revolution happened. Fracking unlocked these massive amounts of tight oil, and production just started soaring again. By 2018, the US was actually pumping out more oil than it did at its first peak in 1970. Unconventional oil literally created a second peak that Hubbard never could have imagined. And to make things even more confusing, we've got this other huge problem. We might not even really know how much oil is left in the tank. Listen to this from Saadad al-Husseini. He used to be a top exec at Saudi Aramco, so he knows a thing or two. He warned that the official numbers for reserves are often inflated. See, here's the key difference. A reserve and a resource are not the same thing. A reserve is oil that's proven to be there and that we can get out of the ground economically. It's like cash in the bank. A resource, on the other hand, is just an estimate of what might be down there. It might be too hard to get to or way too expensive to ever produce. So the danger is that we're making all these big plans based on fuzzy estimates, not on what we actually have in the bank. We could be totally flying blind. So, okay, let's just accept for a minute that a peak is coming, whether it's because of supply or demand. What does life actually look like on the other side of that hill? What are the real-world consequences of living in a world that has less and less oil every year? I mean, just look at this picture of Earth at night. It's breathtaking. It's the ultimate symbol of our modern industrial civilization. But according to some of the more pessimistic theories out there, this picture also shows our greatest weakness. Every single one of those points of light, every one of those sprawling cities is a zone of incredibly intense energy use. And in a post-peak world, those beautiful lights could become the biggest danger zones on the planet. This idea of vulnerability is right at the heart of a really stark theory called the Olduvai theory. It basically argues that our industrial civilization, which it defines by high energy use per person, is just going to be a very brief pulse in the long story of humanity, like 100 years or less. And it predicts the end won't be a slow, gentle decline. Instead, it'll be a rapid collapse, kicked off by a worldwide epidemic of electrical blackouts as our fragile grids just can't handle the strain of energy getting scarcer and scarcer. This graph right here shows you just how terrifying that prediction is. The curve is tracking energy production per person. And look at what happens after it hits a peak around the year 2000. It doesn't gently slope down. No, it falls right off a vertical cliff. This represents a super fast, cascading failure of all the systems that keep our modern lives going, leading to a new, much lower energy world. It's a vision of our whole world getting unplugged all at once. And the impact on our food supply would be absolutely catastrophic. Modern agriculture is basically just a process for turning fossil fuels into food. So no diesel means no tractors. No fuel means no fishing fleets. The production of artificial fertilizer, which is made from natural gas and literally feeds billions of people, would just stop. The global supply chains that bring food from all over the world to our local stores, they would just break down. We would be forced back into a world of really hard, labor-intensive, local farming, which simply couldn't support the number of people we have on the planet today. Okay, so faced with all these possibilities, from a pretty smooth, managed transition on one end to a full-on collapse on the other, what can we actually do? How do we get ready for a future that's going to have a lot less cheap energy? Well, the responses really fall into two big buckets: mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation is all about trying to soften the peak itself. That means things like aggressive energy conservation, just figuring out how to use less of the stuff, and fuel substitution, which is the big push for renewables like solar and wind to replace fossil fuels. But then you have adaptation. That's about getting ready for the change no matter what. This is where you see ideas like localization, rebuilding local economies and food systems so they aren't so dependent on those fragile global supply chains. It's the idea that's driving things like the Transition Towns movement, where communities are taking matters into their own hands and building up their own resilience from the ground up. And let's be clear, the stakes could not possibly be higher. As the astronomer Fred Hoyle once put it, this whole fossil-fueled technological adventure, it was a one-time thing. We've used up all the easy-to-get, high-quality energy. There's no do-over. If we mess up this transition, no future intelligent species on this planet is going to have the same opportunity to try again. And so that leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? For the last 2 centuries, all our progress has been powered by this incredible but finite inheritance of cheap, powerful energy. That era is now coming to an end. So the great challenge of our lifetime, for all of us, is to figure out what the next one is going to be built on.